Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Ayes have it. Move on to the review and acknowledge the disbursements, $45,000 and over. It will be April through June of 2024. Has everybody reviewed those? Any questions or comments? Entertain a motion to approve.
So moved.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Ayes have it. Second quarter dashboard. Hill?
So we actually have Baker Tilly Benhart is on virtually, and he's going to be presenting that. Ben?
Hello, Ben, are you there?
I am here.
We feel better
I
when you're
wish I was there.
So do we. Do you have any good news to share with us today?
Yeah, I think so. I'm going to share my screen so we can go through this dashboard. Tell me when that comes up. That comes up on the screen.
Not yet. There it is.
There we go. Okay. So some of you are used to seeing this information back in the day. I just dusted it off and just keep it going. Just to orient you, on the left-hand side is the last 10 years of sales tax, just kind of give you an overall picture of where the city's been. And these are really the key, let's say key financial indicators that we look at just to see the health of the city and if anything's going awry. If things slow down, obviously that's something we dig into on a regular basis. So on the left is the 10-year sales tax history. On the right, we try to do a comparison of more recent information. Here we've got 23 as the blue and 24 is the orange bars. They're fairly close together on each one of these. They're really kind of hidden by that budget dot. That budget is really on a monthly basis. We try to, based on history, we try to indicate what that month's sales tax is going to be.
Excuse me, Ben, would you remind us, is this sales tax, is it 1 month or 2 month in arrears?
That's true. It's 2 months in arrears.
2 months.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah. So when it shows August, we're really looking at anywhere from May to June point of sale at the register, cash register. Most of the data I've got here is for June because July, I think, just got closed. But in this case, we've got information for July and August on sales tax because it comes in that payment. It gets received at the beginning of the month, which is kind of nice to be able to look at that and see what the rest of the month might need to look like, whether we need to pull back or something. Cumulatively, if you start in January, cumulative through August, we're looking at a 5% increase over 2023. Just August, we're at 4.4, even though that note needs to be updated. It says 4.4. We're right around 5% increase over 2023. Obviously, we're going to continue to look at that as we refine our forecasts for the budget. For the budget, we're actually not taking that high of a growth factor. We're kind of looking at a lot lower. Nothing declining, but we are recognizing that that's probably going to continue to be an increase. We just want to be very careful about what it looks like. You can see in September, that's the biggest sales tax month collection. Again, that's July. That's really the beginning of the peak of the summer that we see. And then there's another increase in December as we head into the holidays for Christmas spending, et cetera. So that's obviously the biggest driver for the financials, being one of the biggest resources for our expenses. On the public safety sales tax side, they kind of follow in suit with what the overall sales tax is. You can see from 2020 to 2022 on the left-hand side, there's a fairly sizable increase. It's flattening off just like the overall sales tax did as well. Transportation sales tax is really the same thing, that 2020 to 2022 kind of flattening out. So I won't spend a whole lot of time on those. We're going to go down to the tourism tax, the one that I'm really more interested in than any of them. Just to because last year, when we talked about the budget, we predicted a slowdown in tourism tax, right? We all kind of agreed that we really didn't know what was coming. Tourism tax had a fantastic increases, as you can see on the left-hand side. From 2020, when we go to 2021, 2 and 3, those are fairly sizable increases. But it's got to slow down sometime. So with everybody's discretionary spending, the cash dried up that was being handed out left and right, consumers' expenses slowed down just so they could take advantage of some of the savings at their bank. And we see a lot of that. We saw a lot of that. Month to month in July, and this sheet is just the right-hand side is just like sales tax. The dot is where the budget is intended to be. We're still ahead of budget through July for the sales tax. Month to month on July, it was down 3%. Overall, year to date through June, and this is 1 month in arrears, not two. So for July, that means it's June's point of sale. June year to date is it's basically flat or just over 0%, almost to 1%. That's actually an increase from the last 2 months. So we see that going up, and just like sales tax, August is one of the bigger collections. You can see that green bar, that blue bar going up. July and August are 2 of your bigger months when you collect tourism tax. So we've yet to see this. We'll have another slide in here in a minute to kind of dig into this. I know some of you have seen this slide before. When we break tourism tax down into the categories themselves, this is really where for me, the proof is on what tourism tax really looks like. We break it down into amusements, theaters, hotels, campgrounds, nightly rentals, restaurants, and concessions. So the amusements are continue to increase over 2024. I'm sorry, over 2023. We've got I'm just getting to my numbers. There we go. The 3% year to date is the increase over 2023 for amusements. We've got a 1% increase month over month. When we look at the theaters, on the right-hand side, you can see that jump in August, a fairly sizable jump in August. July, that's a 2023 August jump over 2022. You would figure that's most likely because price increases on tickets. So we should see a leveling off right on the theater space. Right now, year to date, we're around 5.1% decline. That's a 5.1% reduction from 2023. Now, the number here, the number for theater sales, we've got 343,000 that's come in July, opposed to what the amusements have is about 574,000. So that 0.5% decrease obviously isn't moving the whole tourism tax growth number much, but it's still moving it. So it's still lower. A 2.7% decrease from July last year to July this year. That's actually improved from the last 2 months. In June, it was in May it was almost a 17% decrease month over month. And then June was almost a 5% decrease, and this is 2.5%. So we see a little bit of recovery happening. Again, the big months are going to be the big month yet is yet to be seen is August, and then at the end of the year, November and December. Hotels and hotels, a little bit the same as the campground growth. Month over month, we've got basically flat. I mean, almost to the dollar flat. It's 0% growth. Year to date, though, it's 3.2% increase. And just for perspective, the month of July has 769,000 in tourism tax come in just for that month. And then we've got campgrounds. Campgrounds had a fairly good, that, you'll see a black bar up here in January on the right-hand side. That black bar for 2024 is actually in Sunday research just a little bit, is a few months in the prior years, sales tax or tourism tax had come in and got booked in 1 month. So that's an anomaly, if anything. But you can see the black bars, not quite keeping up with the 2023s. We see some competition out there. The overall though, because of January, May, and June, we're still 9.2% above year to date last year. And just again, for perspective, that's around 24,000 in July that we received for tourism tax on campgrounds. Nightly rentals, if you remember, that's the one that really took off during COVID. We're basically flat year to date. It's 0.3% negative, but that's statistically that's flat. Just for the month of July, we've had an 11% decrease. That's the one where we saw fairly significant increases over 2019. If we look at 2019's July, year to date, we're 160% higher than what it was in 2019 pre-COVID.
Excuse me, Ben, would you just scroll the screen down a little bit so we can see the nightly
sorry.
rentals? Yeah.
There we
Thank you.
are. Sorry about that. Yeah, so the nightly rentals are 160% higher than 2019. We don't have 2019 on this chart. But we've grown since then. So even the blue line, like in January, the blue line, it's higher than it's ever been for the city for nightly rentals. Restaurants and concessions are 1.7% increase year to date. Back up on the nightly rentals, just for perspective, it's around 375,000 in July collections. Restaurants and concessions, we're at 172,000 for perspective. 1.7% over year to date last year. And then it's a negative 3.8%. It's a decrease of almost 4% just for the month of July. That's the only month that came in lower than the previous year's month. So far, I mean, on average, those monthly increases, have been around 3.74%. So it'll be interesting to see what's going to happen here coming up in August. And naturally, we've got on this same page, we've got the narrative.
Excuse me, Ben, would you scroll back up where you have that?
You bet.
Yeah, right there. Thank you.
But we track unrestricted tourism tax. I'm going to pass that by. The water utility charges are doing exactly what we expected them to do, with a slight increase over 2023. Those are looking good. Sewer's the same way. Water's at 5.8%, sewer's at 4.9% growth year to date through June. Property taxes obviously looking good. The 22-23 increase due to reassessments has helped. But if you recall, that's really capped by the state on what we can do. This cumulative, we kind of already talked about. What's interesting on the cumulative sales tax is just to see that green line, the blue line just above that orange line, the orange line being 2023. Orange line was the highest we've ever seen in sales tax, right? So we're above that on blue line. So we've still got quite a bit of money higher than what we had been before. That black line is 2019. That was more normal, if you will, for Branson back prior to COVID. And what we saw back then was anywhere from 1% to 3% increases on an annual basis, fairly slow, predictable on a sales tax. I think we're going to kind of get into that mode again, 1% to 3% increases. We've got obviously a long way to go on sales tax yet, with a few months left. Cumulative on tourism tax, we're just spot on. We're just sitting right on top of 23's line. The colors are mixed up here from the sales tax, but the black line is 2023 in this case. And that blue line sits right on top of it. So we're neck and neck, and we have been. You can see all year we've been on pace, exactly on pace with what 23 did.
If you factor inflation in there, does that mean we've actually have a decrease in merchant revenue that we're taxing?
Yeah, more than likely, yes. Yes. Yeah, I would expect to see that decline due to that inflation factor, yeah. And then I think you're gonna see that would show what the real numbers, if you would, between the black and the red orange line. 'Cause that orange line is 2019. I think last time I was there and when we were working on the budget in 2023, we talked to a few of the folks that are in the tourism industry and said, you know, a lot of this increase is coming through because we've had to raise the price of tickets. So that, I think that's really what you're referring to. If we were able to normalize that, I would be interested to see where the black line would be, how far above that 2019 is.
And we have the same kind of issue in our tourism department. I wonder if it's not time for us to try to come up with some normalization factors for these so that, you know, we're looking at this more wide-eyed and not saying, oh, good, you know, revenue's increasing for the city.
Yeah.
When in fact, the revenue for our merchants is effectively down.
Yeah, that would measure, and we can do that. I don't think that wouldn't be a problem. What this does is from the city's perspective, it shows just the gross revenue that's coming in, that's a resource to be spent. You're right. When we look at predicting that and telling really what that increase is based on, is it based on new visitors, or is the same visitors with more dollars? So
Yeah, I think we actually fall to that. I think we tend
Yeah.
to celebrate when we see the tax numbers up
Right,
without realizing that if we normalize that, they'd effectively be down.
Yeah, I think you're right. Yeah, I think you're right. Well, and to that end, one of the things, I'm just gonna jump to this next one. I'll come back to that other one that I just passed by. One of the ways we try to normalize is to see what track the overall vehicle counts. And I'm not sure if you guys have seen this or not. This shows 2023. It's actually 2024's now. 2024, and this is Highway 76, just as a benchmark, vehicle counts. And this is, the black is 22, I'm sorry, the black is actually these labels aren't right. So the 23 is black, 24 is blue. No, that's not right either. Yeah, these labels are right, because the line here, let's just back up. The line on the blue line is the tourism tax. This is point of sale that month. So this is July's sales that have come in. And what we try to do is see what that tracks on the vehicle counts. The vehicle counts we're looking at are 22 and 23 vehicle counts. And I noticed that 24 is not in here. But what that does is show really where that line is. So the vehicle counts between the last 2 years are almost identical in each one of those months cases. The revenue that's come in is right on the same target as those. So they're not directly attributable to each other, but they do correlate somewhat. So the traffic hasn't gone up. So that kind of leads me back to what you had just mentioned, that gap you see in 2019 to 2023 is probably increases in inflation, what you're saying. So this kind of goes to what you were just referring to. So when we look at the general fund, just month to date or year to date, we've got a 14 million in year to date revenue that's come through in expenses. We're a little ahead, $2 million ahead. We expect to see that through June, I'm sorry. We look at water sewer fund. We're a little bit behind there, but again, this doesn't count for the hot months that are coming through, in this case, July, August. Even though August has been a little bit under lower temperature than what we expected before. It just kind of gives you a benchmark of where we were. This is similar to where we were last year. The misnomer here is on the expenses. Sometimes that includes encumbrances that are in there that may book the whole year's expenses. When we look at budget to actual, what we expected to spend versus where we're at right now, we're a little less than 50% through June. on budgeted expenses within the general fund, which is not a bad place to be. The water and sewer were similar. We've got 20 million that is budgeted in there. We're 7 million in expenses.
Can I just
as-
ask, why are we so underspent on the general fund?
Yeah, that's a good question. Usually it's either turnover or vacant positions. That's your biggest piece. So your biggest piece of your pie is going to be personnel costs. So if you've got turnover or vacant positions, it's going to more than likely make up for a lot of that number. The other piece of that could be transfers over for any kind of capital. Those transfers happen when we have the expenses for the capital. And they potentially happen at the end of the year as well. Sales tax on this one is the same way on the vehicle counts. This was the left-hand side was the tourism tax, right-hand side is the sales tax counts. And this is the citywide, the black line is the citywide sales tax. It's not actually just 76 highway, but it's still the traffic just shows you what the general trend looks like against the traffic flow. And just like in tourism tax, the line where it stops in July is actually for July point of sales. So that's actually what we received in August. So that's actually a July point of sales. And so the traffic in July and that sales tax point are identical. They're the same months. Mayor, that's the dashboard. I think you guys have financials in your packet too.
Yeah.
And they look a little bit different than what you're used to. They come directly out of the finance system. And I'm not going to go through each one of them, but if you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer.
Any members of the committee have any questions for Ben?
It's not a question, but maybe more of a request. It would be nice when these dashboards are great, right? But it would be nice when there is a clear deviation that as a finance committee, we have more information about what caused the deviation and is that going to be permanent throughout the year? Or, just like the discussion about the fund where we're way underspent, I'd like more insight into that rather than kind of the rear view look at it. I'd like to understand what are the implications for rest of the year, right? So I'd like the forward-looking view, especially when metrics are off. I think it deserves some commentary.
Yeah. Ben, how do you feel about that?
I think that's a great request.
Yeah. Thank you, Glenn.
We can absolutely do that. I'd look for any kind of input that you might have. We'll present that in the future. Heck, I can shoot it to you, see what you think before we do it. That way I'm presenting what you guys are looking for. I'd love to have your feedback on something what we could present.
My personal opinion is I don't feel today as updated as I have when we had when we went through the previous presentations. I felt I had a better understanding than I did today with these new charts. And I'm trying to think why. One chart that we could probably easily include, Ben, is the tourism tax breakdown when we put up the actual numbers, the percentage difference month over month and the year to date.
Yep.
I know.
Yeah, there's a second page, the data page that goes behind the actual charts. I could easily include that in the dashboard.
Yeah.
In fact, if you
Okay,
want,
so we're
I can send that to the committee.
we're transferring to this new, what's the program called? Tyler.
Enterprise.
Tyler. So this information is coming from Tyler,
Correct.
which eliminates a lot of duplicating and retyping and all that. So,
A tremendous amount of work. That's exactly right.
yeah, so Tyler's saving us so much time and effort, and will be more accurate, I believe, at the end of the day, because there's less room for errors.
Yep.
So
Yeah, and to that degree, Mayor, we're using Tyler to assemble the budget. Departments have put their numbers into the budget. Our staff get in there, pull them out, analyze them, hash them, but we don't do any databases behind the scenes. They're all in the system.
yeah, that's exciting. But we're still in that transition, as I understand, right? Or are we still doing the two systems to make sure that,
Absolutely.
yeah. So I think that's very exciting. Does any other committee member have any questions or comments about where we stand?
One of the things, Mr. Mayor, that comes to my mind that also Alderman Scholes brought up was I think it would be good to be able to flush out what you're asking for, because in talking with some of our local operators, they've said, and you've seen it in the news, there's been some articles that float around out there. It'd be good for us to control the narrative and show that, like, here's the reason why this is happening, or maybe what you saw isn't actually what's happening, and in fact, things are better than they appear, or if it isn't good, just being able to explain that in clear detail as we're talking about with like inflation or, you know, a drop in vehicle counts. Or I've just had those conversations with some of our local tourist operators or tourism venue operators, and so I think it would just be another layer of transparency.
That's an excellent point. Rumor control says, I've heard comments of some of our tourist operators feel like we're down 30 or 40%, right? So it's like, oh, woe is me, our business is so down. And some of that could be on a case-by-case basis, you know, based on the operations, if you will. But the overview and looking at that chart of actual breakdown by category, I mean, that is what it is. I really do like tracking the traffic along with that. In fact, I'm working with Ben and Alex on providing a little bit more detail on the traffic differences over the years, breaking it down from 76 to Gretna and different locations and seeing what those trends look like. And hopefully we'll have that at our next finance meeting. The category, Ben, that I've been watching, that's actually, it's just jumped off the page over the last several months, has been the theaters.
Yep.
It's number one, it's a big number. Number two, I still believe it's our core industry. And so really need to dive into what's that cause and effect. And I think most of that information will be garnered from some of the actual theater operators in the shows. It could be discounting prices. It could be a lot of things. I mean, it could be some theaters may not be reporting their taxes accurately. So I just wanted to dive into those because that one did jump off the page. Anything?
Mr. Mayor?
Oh, yes.
Two other questions if I can. So could we get just sort of what is the general outlook from where we sit today in terms of how we're going to end the year?
So I think I'd like to ask that question, Glenn, if you don't mind, because that's forecasting, right? That's getting out that magic 8-ball. But I'm curious, and one thing I liked in our presentation is how are we comparing to our budget? Ben, do you recall what assumption we made for a percentage of increase of 24 over 23?
For which aspect?
Well, you
Like-
can either, well, maybe both, sales tax and tourism tax. What did we budget in last year?
Tourism tax was flat, if not 1%, and sales tax was 1 to 2%. They weren't a whole lot. They weren't very big. Our inflation for those two are fairly small. We had fairly large numbers in the past, but we pulled those way back this year for 24.
Yeah, and I know we're entering budget season, so
That's right.
I would anticipate we'll be more conservative going into 25 as far as what we're anticipating. So Ben, do you have to answer Glenn's question, do you have a feeling or a forecast of how you think the trends are going of what we can anticipate?
That's something we're developing now. As if you recall, when one of our first steps out of the gate for the Board of Aldermen and the Finance Committee together is to go through what that expectation looks like. With the high revenue pieces within the general fund, as well as expenses. Where are we year to date, and then what does that look like at the end of the year? So we do go through that in detail. It's not just this information here. I think that the question about the forecast is spot on. It's exactly where we need to be. Being just re-engaged actually, Colby's actually working on it now as we speak, that forecast as we move forward. We've got a pretty good handle on everything. I just want to make sure it gets reviewed and it's right.
Do you have an idea when that might be available to us, either as a finance committee or alderman?
Yeah, it'll be September. It
Okay.
will be September. We have that available.
That'd be great, because
We have it by now, but we just didn't get re-engaged in
The
in
good
time.
news-
We'll keep it out, though.
Glenn, the good news is Monday is September.
the other question I had, I know we're required as a city to maintain reserves, and we probably have more than our required reserves right now. I understand that the company we used for investment, at least maybe it's still current, we've realized an extraordinarily low rate of return on those investments. I'm understanding it's around 1% or maybe even less, which I find appalling in the last year's market that that's all we could achieve. So I'm looking for some direction about what our plan is as a city to, I think, find a more, I don't want to say aggressive because that's the wrong term, but a more reasonable investment strategy when you've got millions of dollars and we as average citizens could handily realize 4% all year long, and the cities with millions only gets 1% or less. Something's not right.
That's right. That's exactly what we talked about last year. I could share your frustration because when I saw that, and it wasn't a 1% increase, it was a loss. When you look at the overall accrual basis financials, it was a loss. It devastated. They had other clients making 5%, and the city was sitting on these long-term investments. I had no clue why they were being invested in. So what we had done was RFP'd the investment advisor, got a new investment advisor, because they couldn't explain what they were doing. I mean, they did, but it didn't make any sense. So we got a new investment advisor, and I know our interest has gone up tenfold compared to what it was, even though that's a low number. So I expect to see, as those maturities happen, that reinvestment in the appropriate maturities take place. We should be anywhere from 4.5% to 5% return on those investments on average. We're not.
So Ben, we had the same conversation on the 76 CID board, and
Yep.
we were realizing the same returns. And
Yep.
then more recently, we're now enjoying about 4.5%, 5% on the TCED fund. I'm sorry, the 76 CID funds.
Yeah.
So are we currently at that 4.5%, 5% range, or is there still, I know one of the reasons were years ago when we put money into long-term bonds, long-term funds, we couldn't change that, right? At the time, 2% looked great, and now we're in a 5% market. So I know we couldn't move some of that money until it matured, but are we now running similar to what the 76 CID is enjoying?
I don't know. I haven't seen that report yet. The last time I saw it was in the first quarter of 2024, and I knew we still had quite a few investments that were past 25's maturity.
Yeah.
I'll get that though, and it's probably something I would hate to give the whole report to the committee just because it's brain damage. but I would like to pick some pieces out of there and be able to show the committee where we're at on investments. I think that's a good point that you're missing that information.
I think the other thing about investments that's just kind of intriguing to me, I don't know the numbers, so maybe this isn't directly applicable, but, we're also coming up on bond redemption issues, and so we're putting money in the bank, in excess money than what we need to have in the bank, as I understand it. We have more than we need in the reserve funds under state law. And yet we've got these looming debts coming up and we're paying interest on some cases on bonds. It just seems like maybe we should even have a strategy to look to pay ourselves off early and get out of some of the things if possible, rather than tolerate low returns and pay out high on bonds later.
Yeah, Branson Landing would be a good example of that.
Yep.
So Ben, at our next finance meeting, would you carve out some time and provide this committee with a summary? We don't need the weeds, but a summary of where we've been on our returns, maybe some explanations of why, and then where we're currently at in forecast, because yeah, on the millions of dollars, those are huge numbers.
Yeah. Absolutely. Yep,
Good
I can
input,
do
Ben.
that.
Anybody else? Do I have anything on the agenda? Oh, yeah, that's the page faster. So, Ben, are you going to go through the utilities rate model? Oh, Kendall. Hello, Kendall.
I don't think he will. Kendall won't let me do that.
Ben, you're more than welcome to.
No.
Thank you, Ben.
All right, good morning.
Morning, Kendall.
So here we are again, another year down. Your utilities team has accomplished so much over the last year. I want to piggyback off of Ben's presentation a little bit on his charts. And so if you looked at the utilities expenses versus the revenues coming in, expenses are outpacing the revenue a little bit. But I believe that's largely due to our staff and trying to, as the common theme is working at the speed of business. We have executed several capital projects early into the year, capital replacements. So we've expedited those. So those expenses have outpaced the revenues coming in. But as the year moves on, you'll start to see that slow down because we've already accomplished or moved forward our capital projects or capital replacements earlier in the year, and revenues will start catching up with our expenses itself. So just a little bit more explanation on that.
Okay, and Kendall, so when we were shown the charts of the revenue versus expenses, do we include capital improvement cost into our expenses, or our expenses operating expenses, separated from capital improvements?
So those, and Ben would have to speak more on this because I didn't create those charts, but my assumption is the one that showed the expenses versus the revenues coming in, that was rate-based expenses. Now, the $20 million budget versus $7 million spent, that I believe includes tourism dollars as well into that. So,
Ben, are you still online?
I am. He's correct, Mayor.
Okay, thank you.
All right, thank you. So I'd like to start off by sharing a little bit of historical information on how we achieve our rates every year, or assessment of our rates every year. Back in 2011, it was the concern was seen that we needed to do have a comprehensive rate model to keep us on track and create a healthier utility. They were depending pretty heavily on the tourism funds. to keep operations flowing, from my understanding, and so to try to create a justification and balance between those two funds, which I'll get into here in just a minute. But we hired HDR Engineering at the time and create this model that we use today, and has been very successful for us over the years. We implemented the model in 2015 and been using it ever since. But what this model does is we look at a 20-year cycle. So we look at 20 years in advance of what capital improvements and equipment replacements are needed to keep the utility healthy. And then we zone in on the next 5 years, or closest 5 years to the budget cycle. And with that, it gives us a good assessment of where we're going, and it gives the customers an understanding of what's expected to come ahead. And so we always share 5 years worth of rate increases with y'all, which tend to fluctuate because different things happen through the year, whether it's regulatory items that come on board or staff. They assess life cycles of equipment. And so things are very dynamic and fluid, and they change from year to year. So with that, we'll start our presentation here. It's a new controller, excuse me. Aha, all right. So I want to highlight some different funds. We have our tourism fund, which was formerly the 145 account, is now 445. This tourism fund we use for large capital projects. So it'd be water main extensions, sewer main extensions, lift station rehabs, treatment plant expansions, things of that nature. That's the heavy hitters that really could affect rates if we had to use rates for those improvements like other entities. However, we're blessed with the tourism fund, and those funds, or that tax, helps us keep our rates at a reduced amount. So then we have our water sewer rates, which is collected through the 620 account. So that covers personnel cost, operations, and maintenance, and then also goes towards equipment replacements. And then we also seek, of course, grant funding. Example is our Compton Drive grants that we've gotten for $13 million. And then our sewer sales tax funds. So the county has a sewer sales tax, and we capture as much of those funds as possible. For 2024, we've captured just over $2 million for some sewer projects. So that's a significant impact that helps us put those tourism dollars back to use in other places itself. So the methodology behind that is to fund, is to create a consistent funding for water and sewer operations through the rate structure. So in case that tourism was to start to drop off, and which also would relate to the sewer sales tax starting to drop off as well, we can still maintain operations with the existing equipment, components, and staff that we have. That can be self-supporting through the existing rate structure itself. And so we use the other funds to help with the heavy items. So this first slide, it shows our water capital, which is funded through rates. And so we transfer dollars out of the 620 account over to our 446 account to cover for projects such as pump replacements, electronic equipment through the treatment plants, various items of that nature, as well as vehicles and backhoes and skid loaders and things that the crew need to perform the jobs efficiently. And so I've got here a 6-year layout of the number of projects that would be for the water side of the utility. And on average, I think we're averaging approximately on the water side 1.2 million in capitals a year for replacements. And then as you go down, let's see, sewer capitals, I believe we're around, give me just a minute here, get caught up. We are around 1.1 million, if I remember right, we're 1 million on the water capitals on a yearly average, and we're spending 1.2 million on the sewer capitals itself. The sewer capitals, I'll give you a good example, like for 2025, we have 10 maintenance projects. One of those projects would be the annual lift station pump replacement program that we do, which will have anywhere between 7 to 10 pumps that we replace. So there's multiple items included in each project itself. So these are items that are necessary to keep the utility operational and running. Staff does a good job of assessing equipment from year to year. They use the years, they listen for equipment making noises and things, and they do their best to keep those equipment operating at their peak performances and keeping the redundancies in place so that if one fails, then we have a backup in place to keep the system running and stay within regulatory compliance itself.
Kendall, before you move on.
Yes.
Would you just briefly explain, both on the water and the sewer, the average viewer would look at this and say, we're getting 6 new vehicles and 2 new vehicles and 6 and 8. And the same with the water. Would you explain what that vehicle column represents?
Certainly. So vehicles could be anywhere from regular pickups to utility trucks to excavators to skid loaders, dump trucks, specialized equipments like valve exercisers, hydro excavation equipment that we use. This is all equipment that helps our staff be efficient and to reduce also risk of injury as well, back issues, things of that nature that helps with our workman's comp situations. But what we do is we assess our vehicles on, in our model, we have a 10-year life cycle on our vehicles itself. So each year we assess the vehicles. Michael's group, his garage services, produces a great list of what expenses that each vehicle has went through each year. So we assess that. There's a scoring value on that associated with that list. And so we take a good assumption or a good assessment of each component for the upcoming cycle or upcoming budget year that's projected in the model, and we assess it. And if the vehicle is showing signs of wear and tear, and it could be, for example, a dump truck, the injectors are starting to go out of it, and we spent $4,000 or $5,000 in 1 year, we know it's getting time, or getting closer to replacing that vehicle, so we do that. And then we also see some, I've got a large piece of equipment on the sewer side of the equation, which is a combo vac truck. And that has a flushing machine built into it along with a hydro excavation system. And that truck doesn't get as used as often, in its early in its life cycle, it didn't get used as often as what it should have been. The crews in the last 5 years have really increased their use of that piece of equipment. It's an expensive piece of equipment. We paid roughly around $300,000 for it. In today's dollars, it's about $500,000. And so it's been due for replacement for the last couple years. I keep pushing it further down the model because it's got low hours on it. But again, it's been broke down 3 times this year. So it's starting to show age. Even though there's not many hours on it, it's not very many miles on the vehicle. It sits there and runs constantly because it's not travel time, it's hours of operation for the day because they're sitting at a manhole flushing out a sewer system or whatever it may be, or hydro excavating a particular sewer main or whatever. And so I've pushed that actually 3 more years down the road, and in this model I've built in where we're plugging in $175,000 each year for the next 3 years into our internal service fund to build up the cash funds to be able to purchase that vehicle at a later date. So it's not hitting us all in 1 year.
Okay,
itself.
very nice.
So,
Thank you. So that'd really be vehicles and equipment.
yes, correct.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah. I try not to confuse it because a lot of our, the green area, the 146 or 446 account is equipment such as pumps and
Yeah.
electricals and things of that nature and blowers and all. So it gets confusing if you put equipment on the vehicle list. So I just classify them as vehicles.
Thank you very much.
Yep. Thanks for the questions. Okay, so here's an example of the tourism tax going to use for the next 5 years. We have in there on the water side, we have roughly $33 million in water projects over the next 6 years. That includes 76 improvements, downtown water system improvements, includes neighborhood improvements for water systems as well, some water extensions, and then also even water treatment plant upgrades as well. On the sewer side, you'll see we have $22 million in projects projected. Again, these projects are fluid. They could be moved from one year to year based off of our staff capacity to handle projects and move things along, or it could be priority changes, right? As we stay in tune to the discussions citywide with board and finance committees and what's desired out in the community, and we express our concerns with the system, and we come together and formulate a plan to adjust those each year. And so this is a fine example of the tourism dollars going to work for the ratepayers. Here in the next 6 years, we're projecting, $55 million in projects. That would be a significant load on the rate structure if we were
You bet.
paying for those projects through rates like other cities do. So, all right, so the next 4 slides, we'll get into the actual rate increases that we're proposing. And I wanted to highlight, before I go through these a little bit, of some of the big drivers in that. Where, for one, I'm going to give you the overall general information on each slide. So we have our available cash. So we take into account our cash that we carry over each year. And I apologize, the numbers on both the water and sewer are inaccurate. I left last year's numbers in there on it by mistake. But on the water side, we're carrying over a little over $3.1 million. And on the sewer side is 5.7, almost $5.8 million on the sewer side, totaling $8.9 million total. And so we divvy up the total cost, 8.9, based off of the number of customers or number of connections for water and sewer. So we have 35% of our connections is water and 65% is sewer. And so we divvy up the funds according to that. So it makes it fair so that sewer rate increases aren't compensating for water needs and vice versa. So, and then you'll see that there's a percent of increase, which is on the I don't have a laser. Okay. So the second line down is, so the first line would be the year, and then the second line down would be the percent of increase proposed, and then you get into the reserves that are left over for the end of the year, projected reserves, and then you get into the percentage of reserves there, and then what the reserve limit is, which is at 20%. And then the bottom chart with all the numbers shows the actual increases, and I'll touch base on those as well.
So Kendall, just if I could, on your chart that you've got up there, so you've got balance of water reserves for 24 of 1.65 million. In the 20% reserve limit is 1.28. So you're saying that 26% indicates you're 6% above the mandated reserve limit in that plan, right?
That is correct, yes.
Okay, thank you.
So you'll see we're actually using a balance of our reserves and rate increases to kind of slow that heavy hit for that year and start to balance it out. If we was to take in not have such of a rate increase, then what would happen is if we start to draw down those reserves to a point, so we get to that 20% level, then we'd have to have a much larger rate increase the next year. So this kind of smooths it out, so to speak, to do that. So with that, give me just a moment here. And I just noticed something different on this, and I apologize. My chart is off by year. So actually, if you can envision the 2024, I have 2024 in there twice at the top. So it should be 2024, or 2025 will be in the start in the blue, and it'll go 26, 27, 28, and 29 to the right of that. So what I'm proposing for the commercial side of the water rates would be 16% on the water side for 2025. So for 2020, for the residential for 2025 is 3% itself. So last year we were requested to split up the rate increase differently between the residential and the commercial. We wanted to put more load on the commercial side and keep our residents' rate increases at a minimal level. And so, so we continued that methodology for this year, and we also extended it to the sewer side of things as well, as you'll see here in a minute in itself. So for residential water rates, we have 3% across the board for residential for 25, 26, and 27, and 28 and 29 is what we're projecting for the next 5 years. As you see down below in the numbers, that's our base meter rate charge per month, and that includes the first 2,000 gallons of water. And you'll see that from 2024 on the 3/4 inch meters, it was $12.12. It elevates to $12.48 for that base rate. And then the price per 1,000 gallons after that, at the very bottom number, is $3.11 for 2024, and it increases to $3.20 per price per 1,000. So the actual dollar amount is very low for the increase itself. And we'll look at the commercial side.
Kendall, before you do that,
Yes.
could you go back to residential? And just, let's talk for a second. So I know 26, 23 starts to sound big, right? But I just did want to emphasize again what you talked about, which is the actual cents difference per month on a bill. Do you know what the average family per month would be impacted on water?
I do. So we do have some slides later on in the presentation, and I can jump forward if you want me to those. Okay, all right. I will definitely touch base on that because that's a good question. And I want to highlight the dollar values more than anything because, especially on the commercial side, the percent of increase seems significant. However, when you look at the dollar numbers, you'll start to see it's not as much as what it sounds to be. Okay, so on the commercial, I forget I can look down here. So on the commercial water rates, again, we're proposing for 2025, 16%. In 2026, in the 5-year projection here, 2026 drops down to 15 for 26 and 27, and then 28 will be 12%, and 29 will be 8%. So we start to climb back down those rate increases, and basically trying to get the revenue numbers up enough to compensate for the operational maintenance needs that we're projecting in the future here.
Ben, are you still on the line?
I am.
This may be an off-the-wall question. Maybe. Is there anything we can do financially to look at the increases, the percentage increase on both the residential and commercial in years 27 and 28? The percentage of increase is reduced from the 25, 26, 27, so those would really be 28 and 29. But the reserves in 28, 29, 30 and 47%. Is there something we can do? Because both on the residential reserve and the commercial reserve, it seems like the current businesses and residents are front-loading on a projected plan to end up with a 47% reserve amount when our required reserve amount is 20. Oh, Kendall, you can handle that?
Yeah, so
Yeah.
the utility side is very fluid and dynamic, right? We usually see that trend from year to year where the first 3-year assessment, the budget year we're discussing, plus the next 2 years, you start to see a downtrend in the reserves, and then the model will start to show an uptick or an increase in the reserve amount on out to 20 years. However, what we're finding and what's challenging, and we're trying to improve this, is that in our every year budget cycle, staff assesses equipment, and we're trying to hone in on life cycles and replacements. And so what the model is probably not showing is there will be some capital items that will, or capital replacements that will be added to it that'll start to draw down those reserves itself. It's the unexpected, right, that we're starting to see. We don't have every piece of equipment listed on the model yet, so we're working towards that. We're actually working on our water and wastewater master plan right now with HDR. So that's part of that discussion, is to assess where we're at with the system and what the needs are. I suspect we're going to have some future capital items that will start to draw that down more. However, I can't definitively put items in there just yet to make a better representation of how that reserve is going to act once we get closer out to those years itself.
So I think what I just heard you say is, over the next couple years, you have a pretty good handle of what the needs are going to be. The further we get out on projections, 4 or 5 years from today, history has shown you that things happen.
That's correct.
All right, a lot of unexpected things.
Yes. We also get regulatory items that come down as well,
That we don't know of.
but that we don't know of. We have lead and copper we're working on right now. We also have implementation of operations that's been regulated on us, like valve exercising, hydrant exercising, things of those natures, that inspections that have caused additional staff needs and equipment needs. And so there's a lot of unexpected that pop up in the utility world that we're trying to build up reserves. Typically, we try to hover between the 20 and 30% in reserves. And
Yep.
stay closer to 30.
Yeah.
I get nervous when I'm looking at year 2027 because we're right on the edge.
That's right.
There, right? And I purposely kept it right on the edge because I didn't want to, I'm trying to show some improvement there from going from 16% down to 15 and hovering there, and then hopefully waterfalling down to a lower percent of rate increase as revenues start to catch up. But again, until we get in closer to those year periods, it's challenging for us right now to really hone in on a solid 5-year projection.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense.
Okay.
My question would be, based on what you just said, and very logical, would it be more representative to show our anticipated expenses in years 4 and 5, even if it was a oops category or miscellaneous or whatever that's called? And then this chart would show a reserve between the 20 and 30 range is where we want to keep it. Versus just looking at this, it looks like it's being front-loaded, right, to build up a huge reserve that we don't need.
So you kind of go back here to the water capitals and the number of projects for 2025. We were at 11, and you can see 2026 drops down to 5. 2027 is at 8. So our goal is to balance those out as much as possible to try to, because the more we balance those out, you got the number of projects, but then you also got the dollar value, right? So I'm looking at the dollar value and to try to average, keep an average. I said the average was around $1 million we're trying to spend each year for capital replacements. And as you see the dollar totals down in the total column there, we're hovering around 700 to 800,000 each year. 2029 really drops down to 360,000. However, I can see that changing in itself. That's probably part of the reason why you're showing a reserve increase in those latter 2 years, is because of that $360,000 a year on the water side itself. But again, that could change pretty drastically. So,
Michael, do you have an opinion on that? I mean, I know the numbers are going to be the same. I just didn't know about the presentation of it.
Thank you for the question. Actually, Kendall just answered the question that I had, which was if he had any angst or reservations about 27 at 20%, because if we have a failure or if we have something that our crystal ball misses, before we get to 27, are we going to be thin on that 20% and fall below it?
Yeah. And good examples, I think, is this fiscal year, we've had those 3 water main breaks on Gretna, right? And
that is correct. We got actually one today.
another one?
Yes.
And each one of those, I mean, the first couple of breaks cost how much? A lot.
So, we have our operational staff, the labor in that, it takes away capacity at being proactive in other maintenance. You have the road repairs itself on
I was
Michael's
just thinking
side.
of the roughly dollar amount.
Yeah, I mean,
Couple
you can-
100,000?
Yeah, very well. Now, if the first Gretna Road leak, what was probably 400-something thousand, 500,000 on that road repair, I think? So,
I think it was around 400. So part of your point of the unknowns is Gretna alone is going to be, give or take, $1 million of repairs that we couldn't forecast, right?
that is correct.
Yeah, so that just, back to that point of, and this isn't a big deal. If somebody was looking at this screen alone, I think that would be a question of why are we having such large increases to end up with a ridiculously high reserve account?
So I appreciate that, and it's going to show up more on the sewer side of things as well. But I'd like to again stress that the staff, we've seen this. We've seen the trend taking place where, the first couple of years and the third year kind of shows a dip and then it starts to increase back up. And that's why we're doing the water and wastewater master plan as well, to help us grasp a better understanding. And two, part of that is, again, going through the model, making sure we have every piece of equipment into the model, which we have not accomplished yet. But that is one of our goals, to get that more refined. And then we'll start to see more equipment replacements being indicated in the model, which should help study that number out. And but we are going to have some years where we're not heavy loaded, and in some years that are. And so that's where the reserves are going to float up and down to compensate for that, because pump components are expensive, and it's hard for us to determine exactly when they're going to take place. So the 20% is what state statute is, right? But as a utility reality, we should be operating at least at 30% reserves, if not maybe a little bit more, because of the cost of our components and everything.
Okay, thank you. I didn't mean to bog down.
That's okay. Good questions. Appreciate them. Okay, so we already talked about, so on the commercial side, you'll see the base rates in the bottom. Another example, again, the base rates for 3/4 inch meter is $13.18, and that'll go to $15.29 with that 16% increase. And then another one we highlight is a 2-inch size meter on the commercial is $70.30, and it goes to, or increases to $81.55. And those do, again, include the first 2,000 gallons of usage, and then every 1,000 gallons after that goes from $5.02 to $5.82 per 1,000 gallons. So the residential sewer rates, again, we went with the same theme as our methodology as the water side, and we kept it at 3% across the board itself for that. And you'll see the reserves, they're at 68%. And then again, they start to drop down a little bit, and you'll see it goes to 54, 52%, 52%, 53%. We're starting to hover out a little bit right there. And again, we'll have, on the sewer side of things, we're going to have some significant equipment costs up and coming. And the reason why I say that is part of our water and wastewater master planning on the sewer side of things, or the wastewater side of things, is we're pushing towards more flow monitoring in the gravity sewer system. What we're seeing right now, and for the last, really the last 10 years, what we've been trying to combat is I&I, inflow and infiltration of unwanted waters in the wastewater system. When we go from our normal average daily flows at Compton Drive from around 2.5 to 3 million gallons a day, and then we see a week of rain, and those flows will increase during rain events. When the ground's saturated, we'll see flows up to 13 million gallons a day. Wow. We are pushing the limits of our treatment plant. Hydraulically, we can handle it up to right about that $13 million mark, or 13 million gallon mark. Thankfully, it's diluted. The nutrient loads are diluted at that point. We can still handle the nutrient levels. We still produce high-quality effluent coming out into the lake, but it's taxing our pumps and our equipment during those rain events. So we need to really hone in on I&I reduction throughout the gravity system, and that's going to take remote metering devices and manholes to determine what basin is giving us the most I&I issues, and then start tackling it from there. Yep. So you're going to see our maintenance costs start to increase, because we'll conduct smoke testing on gravity lines to try to identify the I&I areas, and it's a large challenge to tackle. Yes. And so that's, I guess, my biggest highlight for those sewer reserves is we've got some upcoming expenses that are going to start to chop that down pretty heavily. Let's see, so on the sewer side, for residential, you'll again see the 3/4 inch base rate go from $10.02 to $10.32, so 30-cent increase there. The price per 1,000 gallons goes from $3.17 to $3.27. Commercial side, we're projecting an 8% increase. Last year we had a 6% across the board. So it'll be 8% for commercial, and that, again, on the 3/4 inch goes from 10.02 to 10.82, and then on the 2 inches looks like, let's see, $53.34 to $57.61, and then the price per 1,000 goes from $6.13 to $6.80 or $6.62. So here's a chart Kathy was looking for on the dollar value amount. So residential and commercial water and sewer usage here. Residential for 3/4 inch meter, you'll see our 2024 numbers on the water side. It goes from, this is based off of a 5,000 gallon usage per month, which many of our residential customers use less than that. So you'll go from, for 2024, it went from overall bill of $21.45 to an overall bill of $22.09. So what that is, a 64-cent increase there. And then on the sewer side goes from $19.53 to $20.12. So you're at a 59-cent increase. With the combined water sewer billing, you're at a $1.23 increase per month itself. So the dollar value on the residential side is very low for the increase.
Okay, I'm going to go back to the same question. On the commercial side, it's an extra $150 a month, right? And if you go back one slide, that's commercial sewer. I'm struggling with adding an extra $150 for commercial property, increasing the percent of increase from 6 to 8 to end up with a 68% reserve.
So the $150 increase, combined increase, is based off of your 16% water increase and 8% sewer increase. So you're at for a 2-inch meter at 100,000 gallons of usage per month, you're at $142, a little over $142 increase for that month. The sewer side of things, and I understand your question and your concern with the amount of reserves on the sewer side. Again, we could lower those down, not have as much of an increase on the sewer side, but I'm anticipating some large expenses coming up on that sewer end with the I&I reduction side of things. And so my concern is that if we lower those too far down, then once those capital improvements come into place, or capital equipment purchases come into place, we'll see a pretty significant rate increase just to get us back up to the level we probably needed to be at.
And I truly understand your methodology. I really do. It's just on the forecasting side, the projection side, I think it would be more palatable, because we do, supporting your statement, we do want to have enough for those what-ifs.
Sure.
But again, if that was listed under the expense side, it would not show a 68% increase on the reserve.
Yeah, we could add to the model some projected numbers to show what those would be if we added, if we started pursuing the I&I reduction. So we could bring down the, that reserve amount by showing additional expenses in it for
Well,
sure.
as a business owner, those would be the questions I would ask, right? You're charging me $140 a month more just to build up your savings account. Okay, so enough of that, we can move on. Thank you.
Okay. And one thing to highlight as well, and what you're not seeing is, I've got my model actually pulled up in my other computer over here. And part of that model, it shows what we're deficient for the year. So it takes what the revenues coming in and what the operational expenses are with the capital replacements that are rate-based. And those operational expenses and maintenance plus the capital replacements those amounts are higher than what the revenue is coming in. So we are, in a sense, we are drawing down our reserves for the next couple of years. We're actually deficient for 2025 and 2026. So we're drawing those down, but still maintaining a level that's concerning based off of looks when you see what you pointed out. That, again, we can still add more capital projects in there to start drawing that number down based off assumptions or whatever.
Thank you.
Okay.
Kendall?
Yes,
It'd be, am I simplifying this too much to say that one of the line items that we show in the presentation of the model for the public going forward would just be expected I&I investments?
Definitely.
Or expenditures, whatever word we want to use.
Yep.
Right? I mean, it can just be that simple. I don't want you to spend a lot of time detailing what all are the different areas that you'd be going after I&I. And frankly, I'm surprised, like, the bigger regulators haven't been all up in our grills about that. Maybe I shouldn't have said that part out loud, but,
I
you
wouldn't
know,
have said
yeah,
that in a public meeting.
That's a big concern usually for the higher levels of government. So I'm very thankful to see that you guys are looking at that with scrutiny and expecting that we need to get a handle on that, not just for the longevity of the equipment, but also for, you know, everything else that goes along with those challenges for the environment. So that's terrific. But
And
I think
also,
if we're
I'm sorry,
general
go ahead.
and vague, not to be vague, but just to not overcommit to particular projects, I think that's a very fair way to explain it.
So I also need to add, and I failed to mention this earlier, and one of some of the biggest drivers in the rate increases, and again, that's, you know, operational commodities, you know, this purchase of things, as you see inflation and everything is causing things to increase as well. Our water tower maintenance is still a heavy hitter on the water side itself. Next year, in 2025, we are tackling the Recplex Tower. If you look at the Recplex Tower, you can see how just viewing it from the outside, it's not very palatable and to the eyesight itself. But it's going to get a complete rehabilitation next year, as well as the wellhead, the well pump in itself. Has been giving us problems. So that's something that was also added. That's the reason why it drove that 16% up for rate increase. But we also, we're working on security issues. We're working on, we plugged in for both water and sewer next year. I plugged in around $300,000 for site security issues. This could be fencing, additional cameras. We have also, Chad, the IT department and the utility department, we've been working pretty extensively on our network security behind the scenes. We have a lot of automated controllers that are part of our processes, and that, without saying too much for public, we need to look at some updates. And so as part of that, there's some significant costs. The first cost was thrown at me was around $600,000 just for those automatic controllers. What those do is they help keep our number of staff reduced. When they're working, they're great. We have to have less staff. We're not operating manually. It also creates some efficiencies within the operations and allows us to do things that we're not normally able to do if we had to operate the old analog way. So there's some, but automation comes with a risk, and we have to evaluate those risks, and we've assessed it, and I think there's some new numbers that came in that is quite shocking of what have, in order to address the issues, and we're talking, instead of 600,000, we're talking more in the millions. So
Kendall, in that regard, you and I have talked about this. I would like to ask, and again, it's difficult to talk about this with any specificity in this kind of format, but I realize you've got essentially a multi-year plan relative to security, and that's great. But having been in that field, and in the very field that you're working on from a cybersecurity perspective, I'd like to ask that we pull some of the future year spend into this year, into 2025. I think you've got 300 physical, 300 cyber, if I recall the numbers right. Is that correct?
So we have,
In next year?
for next year, we have 300,000 total for network security
Yeah, cyber
replacements.
and 300 for physical,
That's
right?
split 50-50 between water and sewer.
Yeah. What I'd like to ask that you take a serious look at is to pull forward some of the 2026 allocation into 2025. Because as we've discussed, from my perspective, the worst thing that could happen to us as a tourism community is to have an event related to this. I'll just stop there. And personally, I would say if you need any backing or you need any more direction in that regard, I'd ask Kathy to schedule an executive session with the board so that we can dive into some of the details and give you some additional backing. But I'd seriously request that you at least pull 100,000 in each category into 2025, and maybe even more is necessary. I realize we're going to reach some limit of our capability to execute on that money, but I just feel at the rates we're spending, it's not fast enough. It leaves us more exposed over multi-years, and it's not going to be a good look if we have an event and say, oh, but we would have fixed that next year. You know what I mean? So it's small dollars compared to your overall budget, but it can have a huge impact. So Kathy, I'd ask that maybe you support the opportunity to pull some future dollars, even if it just, I don't think it has to affect the rates at all. I think with the small dollars involved, we could easily just manage it through the reserves as we span those years. So it would have no effect at all on the public, and yet we'd be protecting ourselves at a faster pace.
So with that, the timing of this presentation versus the timing of our outside consultant for the network security discussions has been done. It's a little off. We're a little ahead on this presentation. We have a meeting in September coming up that's going to really lay out kind of a plan of action for the network security, and really we're looking closer to $4 million. So at that point, I'm assuming that is hiring out the work to be done. Normally we do all of our PLC programming internally with our staff, but we only have so much staff capacity. That's a big feat for our staff to try to accomplish with the number of controllers that we have out there. So we may have to lean on outside help to perform that work, which comes at a cost. And at that amount, I would recommend spending tourism dollars on such a large project if we are able to. From my understanding, it's still considered infrastructure. We should be able to do that based off of, I believe, the definition of the tourism dollars itself.
Kathy, given that, could I ask that specifically that the aldermen have an executive session as soon as that report's available and your staff's had time to digest it? I think it's big enough numbers and a big enough impact that the aldermen really need to get a confidential briefing on it.
Absolutely. And additionally, Kendall, we can work more internally to dice out what are some things that maybe we can phase in versus an all-at-once $4 million expenditure. So we'll know so much more, right, after that study comes back from the consultant on which things maybe we can do in bites, like meaningful bites, like what the alderman's saying, and then we'll be able to better brief the board after we get that report together.
Yep.
Is that okay?
Yeah, that sounds good.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. Okay. All good questions, and I appreciate that. It's something we're working towards and making our utilities safe and healthy and long-lasting and for the residences especially, and then for the commercial businesses. We want to keep our economic engine running, right? And that's important to not only Branson, but the entire county and our region. So let me make sure I'm not skipping slides here. Okay. So next chart. So every year, my staff does a phenomenal job. Christy Holland, she's one of our office specialists. She calls and researches approximately 90 entities across Missouri and then stretches out into areas like Myrtle Beach and Pigeon Forge and things of that nature. Some of the entities are similar to us in nature. And we compare our water sewer rates to those entities. But I would like to say this, is that it is good to know where we land, where we fall within these other entities. But we also have to compare apples to apples because not every utility is the same. The city of Branson years ago made the initiative to pursue surface water treatment processes. And that was an effort to preserve our groundwater sources for the county and to relieve the load that Branson and this tourism industry would have placed on the area county residences and other businesses. But it comes at a cost. It is more expensive to operate water surface treatment plants. Most entities don't have that. They just have groundwater wells and then disinfect from there. So we do have added cost, but again, I believe it's important for our area, especially with the loads that we place on the area with the economic load with the tourism industry. So on the upper left, we have the local area commercial water rates with our splitting the water rates from the residential. We have seen some increases in that placement on the chart. Usually we fell within the middle. Last year we were a bump up from the middle, and this year we're even another bump up from that. We're in the yellow towards the left of the chart. And then local area residential water rates, we're still on the bottom tier, I would consider, at $22.09 for, and this is again based off of a 5,000 gallon usage per month. And then in the middle bottom would be the surface water and biological wastewater treatment. So we're trying to compare to other entities that have similar water treatment and sewer treatment to us. And so you'll look there, we're at the very bottom on the water, or the residential side of things. These are residential rates on the bottom. And then local area residential sewer rates, we're in the yellow. We're at the very bottom of that chart. For those comparisons, you've got Republic, Springfield. We have Taney County public water districts there, Forsyth and Hollister, Nixa, Ozark in there as well. So we can see locally we're at the bottom. Locally on the sewer side for commercial, again, we're pushing above middle range in that as well. And I believe we're at the end of the presentation, so I'm happy to answer any other questions.
Do those charts suggest to you, when you just kind of look at them from the big picture, that we're over adjusting on our commercial rates versus residential?
Not necessarily, but the reason why I say that is because the amount of revenue produced off of residential compared to commercial, the heavy users are the commercial. I believe, I think I have my numbers in here somewhere.
I think your report showed 75% on the commercial sector.
Yep. Yep, 75% on is revenue captured is from commercial side of things. So 25% is on the residential side. So if you look at the dollar value on that 25%, it's not very much. Could you increase, if you increase the residential side up, if you looked at the rate increase required, if you increase the residential side up, if you say you increased it to the 16% increase, or even, yeah, if you increase both of them the same, we'd actually probably be able to drop it down maybe 1% to maybe 2% overall by doing that. But based off of last year's discussions, we kept it at the 3% and commercial higher because there's not that much of an impact itself.
Well, in addition to that, some history on the tourism tax is the tourism tax is voted on by the residents. And the residents remind us often that they were promised if they would support the tourism tax, 75% of that goes for infrastructure, which will keep their water and sewer rates low. So that's been the history here with all of our residents, and I'm just hell-bent to fulfill our promises. Any other questions from the committee?
One thing I'd like to offer, just having gone through some courses in Homeland Security, is as the aldermen go into those conversations, which are huge, I think it'll be helpful for not only the aldermen, but any residents that want a little more background on something that's not going to cause a security violation, to visit the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Agency's website, CISA, and they have water and wastewater identified as one of the 16 critical infrastructures nationally, and there's reports for anybody who wants to know, like, why is the city going to go into these meetings? That's all publicly disclosed and gives a pretty good entry-level introduction to the topic.
Great suggestion.
Yep.
Yeah. Yeah. There's a fine line with the public on that, right? They want to be educated, they want to know, but there's sometimes we have reasons where we don't want to disclose everything. So, bless you.
Bless you.
I guess the only other thing I'll share is I think it's pretty cool that I live in a city that, or a country, one that has 330 million people, a city of 12,000 that sees the millions of visitors that we do, and that knowing that 80% of the country pulls its water usage, its potable water usage, from a system like ours. And for our system size, for our residency, there's about 3,700 of those. When you look at Compton and you look at that whole project, I see like diligence and a commitment to protecting a unique resource that we have to have. And so I just appreciate the amount of work that is going on down there, and the fact that we have the system that we have, because we couldn't have the guests that we have without that system. And so just being thoughtful towards, 75% of the market load going to commercial. The systems don't know anything about a resident or a commercial. They know gallons and things of the sort. So I appreciate that we carried that forward from last year's discussion, and that we have the system, because we have, there's not too many municipalities in Southwest Missouri that have the law enforcement and fire protections that we have, but it comes with being a good steward of our guests. So all that being a roundabout, your team's phenomenal, and thanks again for respecting the residents in this process.
Thank you.
And I think it was also good to raise the awareness that water, sewer, think about that. And then you show us over the next 6 years, $55 million, right, of expenses and capital improvements. $55 million for any community is huge. And we wouldn't be able to do it without the tourism tax. So thank you for that. Anybody else? No other questions?
So I just
Kendall?
want to recap a little bit. So the major, or the discussion items was obviously the cybersecurity, and then, but also create some placeholders in there for some future capital items that we expect to be upcoming to help show a better, more accurate reserve balance
Yes.
from year to year. Okay.
That'd be great.
All right.
Thank you. With that, I'll entertain a, We don't, do we vote
There's
on
no
this
vote on
now?
this. It's just, it's me coming to you as, coming to the committee, asking, for your thoughts and direction on that. From my understanding, I don't think we've ever voted on it before. It comes to a public hearing before the board, and then the board votes on it. We expect to take this in October, so.
Yeah, so what we just saw is a prelude to our budgeting meetings that are upcoming.
That is correct. You guys are our advisory committee that we're trying to make sure we're staying on track with what city leaders are requesting of the utility, and we appreciate your questions and input, and we'll make adjustments and
Yeah,
bring it
and
back.
so the value of this committee, like a lot of our other committees, is we have the opportunity to get in the weeds,
That's right.
right? Yeah. And then make the recommendation to the board.
Yep.
No other comments? I would entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Ayes have it. Thank you very much.